All right, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us for the Men's Club Presidential Quiz Part 2 with Guy Moss. And Guy, on to you.
So I gather our chances of this going viral are now nil. But if anyone can arrange it, feel free. I've never gotten that level of notoriety. So thanks first to Alana, who chairs the programs for the Newton Senior Center and does a wonderful job. And thanks and kudos also to my co-originator of this program, Gary Seligson. Gary and I did this as a unintended at the time, part 1 in February. And people liked it, or so they told us. And we had leftover questions and we added questions. So this is now part 2. And amazing as that may sound, together there will be something like, I don't know, 170 questions on the presidency, and to a limited extent, very limited, the vice presidents. So the Newton Men's Club, just to put in a request, historically has tried to put on programs on the 4th Thursday of every month, except for the summer. If there are any people out there who have an interest in speaking or know of someone who might want to speak, please let me know, let Alana know. I can be found on the web. You have Alana's email from the notice. Mine in any event is ursusgbm@gmail.com. But we'd love to know. It could be roughly about an hour plus some Q&A. In our case today, I think we have until roughly 10:50 for these questions. Now, as far as the format, the same as we did with part 1, for reasons that need not be gone into, it was a balancing of a variety of goals. What we'll do is I'll ask a question, we will put the document online, and Alana will keep scrolling as we go from question to question. Each question will have some multiple choice answers. If the question uses the word president or presidents as a singular or plural, that may not necessarily be a clue to whether the answer is one or more. In any event, there's no score, there's no Google poll. Just keep a record of your score if you want. It doesn't really matter. The aim here is to have fun and combine it with some education, because after each question, I will give the answer, and then for almost all of them, I'll have certain explanation. I'll have a certain explanation that goes a little bit more into the question and the answer. Let's see. And I don't think you have to be mute during this for auditory purposes unless Alana makes you mute. And the last comment is, if you have questions or your own comments, I suppose ideally hold them to the end, but if something pops up where you feel you want to speak after we cover a particular question, then either pipe up or send Alana something on the Q&A function. But in any event, feel free. We won't pursue anything in depth because these questions, there are a good number of them. I think they're quite interesting. They cover a wide array of things from 1787 on. So let's start with the first. Alana, put up the screen. So I'll read them. We'll give you a few seconds to try to answer. So the first is, which presidents won elections in part due to the actions of one or more Supreme Court justices regarding electoral college votes. Lyndon Johnson, Hayes, George W. Bush, Trump, Teddy Roosevelt, Joe Biden. And I'll give the answer. And if anyone feels that timing is inappropriate, we may move a little faster because after all, these aren't being graded and I want to get to as many of them as possible. But if I'm moving too fast and you feel that reduces the fun element, then let me know. So the answer here is three of them. And someone may disagree, but the question did call for in part. Hayes benefited not by a decision of the court, but by a decision of certain members of the court who were part of an electoral commission that Congress set up to resolve disputed submissions of electoral vote planks, if you will, by several of the southern states. They did not have at that time the system we have today under the Electoral Vote Count Act. And as a result of the decision by that commission, which included, I believe, 5 Supreme Court justices, and for reasons we don't have time to go into, one particular swing justice, Hayes became the winner. George W. Bush, of course, was the subject of Bush v. Gore in 2000, and that dealt with the counting, or really the recounting of the popular vote for president in Florida in certain of the counties in Florida. And then the last is Biden. You might not have included this, but I did, because at one point, if you recall, there was the case of Texas versus Pennsylvania, where a challenge was made to the changes that Pennsylvania had made in voting procedures. And of course, the aim was to reverse the ruling by the appropriate official in Pennsylvania that Biden had carried that state, and that case was dismissed for lack of standing. And so the challenge, as well as other challenges, failed. Okay, question 2. Who sent naval squadrons to fight the Barbary pirates? Monroe, Jefferson, Jackson, or Polk? And here the answer is Thomas Jefferson. From 1801 to 1805, we had the what was called the First Barbary Wars. And that resulted from a collection of certain North African states called the Barbary states at the time, who seized American commercial ships and held the crew for ransom. And we'll come to a later question that ties into one of those Barbary states, but I won't mention that now. What I will say is, you may remember from the Marine Corps hymn that starts off, forgive me for any effort to sing, from the halls of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli. Well, Tripoli was at that point one of the Barbary states, and it refers to the First Barbary Wars. Tripoli is now part of Libya. Okay, question 3. Who was president when the Gadsden Purchase added territory to the United States? Pierce, Monroe, Buchanan, or Van Buren? And the answer here is Franklin Pierce, because he was president in 1853 when this acquisition was made. And the Gadsden Purchase was a resolution of a controversy over the southern parts of Arizona and New Mexico. And so a treaty was entered into. The name Gadsden is used because he was the US ambassador to Mexico at the time, and the price was $10 million. Next question. Okay, who was associated with the Teapot Dome scandal? Grant, Harding, Wilson, Kennedy.
Wilson.
I don't know who said that.
Steve Kane.
No yelling out, because I have no way of rewarding you or punishing you.
Okay.
But the answer is Warren Harding. So you are roughly in the same time frame. But it was Harding who had a number of scandals during his administration. And what this one was about was a cabinet member, Albert Fall, took bribes for selling below market leases of certain oil reserves at the Teapot Dome oil field in Wyoming. And I believe he was the first cabinet member ever to have been prosecuted during his time. I don't know if he was the last. If anyone does know another, hold it for later. Okay, number 5, who signed Medicare into law? Lyndon Johnson, Nixon, Kennedy, Carter. All right, so this one has less of an explanation. It's 1965. Hard to believe. What is that? 56 years ago. And it's Lyndon Johnson. Okay, number 6. Who said, or I should put it, who, quote, forgot to duck, unquote? McKinley, Ford, Reagan, or Obama?
Reagan.
Well, whoever said Reagan was correct, although this is where I regret that we can't be broken into teams or have a poll, but there were certain technical or time reasons why that was not going to work in the eyes of Gary, Alana, and myself. But it was Reagan. After he was shot and he was going to the hospital, he said to his wife, Nancy, honey, I forgot to duck. And this was the assassination attempt in 1981 by John Hinckley Jr. Okay, number 7. Who was instrumental in saving Lincoln from assassination in 1861? George Custer, Ulysses Grant, Hannibal Hamlin, Alan Pinkerton, or Wild Bill Hickok? And the answer here is Alan Pinkerton, who became the founder of the Pinkerton Detective Agency. And
He already had founded it by the time he saved Lincoln.
I'm sorry? Oh,
He had
okay.
already founded Pinkerton Agency by
Gotcha.
the time. He
Gotcha.
didn't later found it. He founded it
gotcha.
before.
I stand corrected. Lincoln was on his way from Illinois to Washington for the inauguration in 1861. There was a plot brewing that was addressed to a seizure of Lincoln, I guess, on the train or during a train stop in Baltimore.
He had to switch trains. He had to go from one train to another. That was the problem. That's where he was vulnerable.
Okay, and there's a recent book on this, which I have a feeling that the speaker has read.
Yes.
And I have not, but I'm told it's an interesting book. It's, if I could read my notes, it's by Brad Meltzer and another gentleman called The Lincoln Conspiracy. And I think it came out just 1 or 2 years ago at the most. Needless to say, he wasn't at that time. And the group that was hired by the railroad did a good job of either diverting the train or, well, we won't go too much into this, but in any event, the plot was foiled. Okay, number 8. Which president also was both minister to Russia and Secretary of State? Jefferson, Madison, John Quincy Adams, Franklin Pierce. And the answer is the multi-talented John Quincy Adams.
Right.
He was minister 1809 to 14. He was the Secretary of State under Monroe. And amazingly, he was also a US Senator and a congressman from Massachusetts, in addition to being president. And we'll come across him with a later question. Number 9, who, when a woman sitting next to him at a dinner party told him she had bet that she could get him to say at least 3 words, replied, "You lose." This may or may not be apocryphal, but it does bring a smile.
It's a famous story.
Lincoln, Obama, yeah, there are a few famous stories that may or may not be true, but Lincoln, Obama, Coolidge, Wilson, Harding. And the answer is Calvin Coolidge, who also had the nickname Silent Cal, which of course reflects the story we just read, supposedly for his quiet, steadfast, and frugal manner. And I might add, a governor of Massachusetts as well. All right, number 10. Who was associated with the growth of the interstate highway system? Franklin Roosevelt, Truman Eisenhower, Kennedy, and Lyndon Johnson.
Roosevelt.
And the answer is Eisenhower.
Really?
He signed a bill that created the interstate highway system. From my reading, something like 4,100 miles of highways through the country. And some have commented that the development by the United States of all of its highways was so advanced relative to the rest of the world that we failed to benefit from later technology in the preservation of highways and how they create the layers for the formation of roads that protect against, ice and snow and changes in weather and temperature. And so when the rest of the world caught up, they were using more modern technology and now have better systems.
Guy, there's a lot of sentiment that he did that was funded so that whites could escape the inner cities and just let the blacks be the sole inhabitants of that. And there's a lot now, they're revisiting a lot of what was done there in racist
Interesting.
perspectives.
Interesting comment. All right, let's go to number 11. Who was identified with the era of good feelings? Monroe, Ford, Carter, Theodore Roosevelt. And this is a question that also will tie in with a later one coming at that period from a different perspective. The answer is Monroe, who was president from 1817 to 1825. And this was a period following the War of 1812, when you had a fair amount of westward expansion, economic prosperity, and national unity. Probably the last time we've seen anything of that sort. All right, number 12. Who suspended the writ of habeas corpus? Wilson, John Adams, Lincoln, Reagan, Trump. And the answer is this occurred in 1861. So it was Lincoln. It enabled people to be held without trial indefinitely. And this was done as a war measure so that the military authorities could deal somewhat better with and silence agitators and rebels. I don't have any relevant statistics on to what extent it was applied, but so far as I'm aware, it was the only time that this was done at the presidential level. All right, number 13. Who signed the Anti-Immigrant, Alien, and Sedition Acts? Trump, Wilson, Franklin Roosevelt, John Adams, Harry Truman. And the answer is John Adams in 1798. These were 4 laws restricting activities of foreign residents and the freedom of speech and the press. It was a time when people feared imminent war in France. It was not a good mark on the Constitution so soon after it was promulgated, and all but one of these acts expired by 1801. Okay, number 14. Going to move a little faster out of necessity. Who, after war, organized shipments of food to starving millions? Truman, Hoover, Eisenhower, definitely not Trump, Grant, Clinton.
Guy,
Yes.
on the question about habeas corpus, George W. Bush also suspended habeas corpus in dealing with foreign.
I thank you for adding that. All right, on 14, Hoover was involved in this process actually twice, to my surprise when I was doing this. 1917, when he was head of the US Food Administration, and then in 1946 for Truman as part of the Emergency Finance Relief Program. Number 15. Whose presidency led to the formation of the Progressive or Bull Moose Party? Taft, Teddy Roosevelt, McKinley, Hayes. And the answer is Taft, because this was founded in 1912 by Teddy Roosevelt after he lost his bid for the Republican presidential nomination. He wanted to run for president, but couldn't for the major parties. And he boasted that he felt, quote, strong as a bull moose, which is a male moose, and hence the nickname. 16, who was the unlikely champion of civil service reform? Reagan, Nixon, Coolidge, Arthur, Hayes. And the answer is President Arthur. It's unlikely because Arthur, who became president with the death of Garfield, was a beneficiary of the spoils system, which used to be the way that people who came to power would have control over the dissemination of jobs, hundreds, if not thousands of jobs. Arthur signed the Pendleton Act in 1883, and this was the beginning of federal reform. It was not at the time as broad as civil service reform is now, but it was a beginning. And one of Arthur's major positions prior to the presidency was as customs collector for the Port of New York. And these positions all around the country were very lucrative to the individual and gave the individual quite a bit of power. Number 17, who tried to increase the number of Supreme Court justices? Which president? Trump, Franklin Roosevelt, Harding, Nixon, Taft. And the answer, as I'm guessing most of you got, was Franklin Roosevelt. But contrary to what people think, this was not an effort to just increase it from 9 to 15, which was the range of the bill, all at once. It was geared, this so-called court packing scheme was geared to replacing judges who reached the age of 70, who otherwise didn't retire. So in theory, it could have been gradual. And it was defeated. And as you may now know, there's an effort to reform aspects of the Supreme Court, including the concept of adding justices under one scheme or another, which is likely to fail, as I imagine you will agree. Okay, number 18. Who signed the Sherman Antitrust Act? Teddy Roosevelt, Benjamin Harrison, Cleveland, or John Sherman? And yes, it's named after John Sherman, but of course he wasn't the president, and it was signed in 1890 by Benjamin Harrison. And this was the first of a number of efforts over time to reduce combinations of economic power that were viewed as detrimental to the consumer. All right, let's go to 19. Who signed the bills comprising the Compromise of 1850, an effort to address growing slavery and westward expansion? Buchanan, Taylor, Lincoln, none of the above. So this is the first of our, if there are any more, none of the aboves. It was Millard Fillmore. And the Compromise was actually a series of bills that were designed to deal with, as I say, slavery and westward expansion. Ultimately, of course, unsuccessfully. They included the Fugitive Slave Law, the admission of California, and we'll leave it at that. This is a complicated subject to describe. Let's go to number 20. Who had to deal with the Panic of 1837? Van Buren, William Henry Harrison, Polk, Taylor. So of course, for this one, you basically have to know your dates. And it was Van Buren. The real significance of this question is to realize that the Great Depression was not the only time by any stretch that the United States faced very serious economic downturns. The Panic of 1837 was such a period, and it actually lasted a meaningful number of years into the 1840s. It was a major depression caused, to be simplistic, by over-speculation and certain policies that Andrew Jackson had put into place. Okay, let's go to 21. Who presided over the annexation of the Philippines, Guam, and Puerto Rico? McKinley, Teddy Roosevelt, Garfield, Taft. So here this resulted from the 1898 peace treaty that the US signed with Spain that ended the Spanish-American War, and the answer is McKinley. Okay, 22. Who began the process of annexing Texas, which occurred officially soon after he left office? Van Buren, Taylor, Tyler, or Polk? And the answer is Tyler. He pushed for it. He was, to a great extent, an unaligned president who was also the first vice president to become president after a death. And the process began in 1843. On the very last day of his presidency, or possibly the day before, he signed an annexation treaty that had to be further approved, and this led to a process by which Texas was formally admitted to the Union in 1846. So for those of you who guessed Polk, 1846 was during his term, and of course Polk is well known for westward expansion, the Mexican-American War, the acquisition of the Northwest Territory, and it would have been a good guess otherwise, but it began with Tyler. Okay, number 23. Who signed the Interstate Commerce Act, the first attempt to regulate railroads? Teddy Roosevelt, Benjamin Harrison, Grover Cleveland, Franklin Roosevelt. And the answer is, this occurred in 1887, so it was Grover Cleveland. The act made railroads the first industry subjected to federal regulation. All right, let's go to 24. Who was most interested in avoiding political parties? Washington, Adams, Jefferson, or Lincoln? And the answer is George Washington, who obviously didn't get very far with this desire, but in his farewell address of 1796, he urged a unity and warned of the harmful effects of presidential parties. But needless to say, the Federalists and I guess it was the Democratic Republicans were fairly soon organized, and we had political parties, and this was an area that really wasn't expected very well or dealt with very well in the formation of the Constitution. Okay, number 25. What famous Indian fighter ran with the slogan Tippecanoe and Tyler too? Which has a nice rhythm to it. Jackson, Harrison, Polk, Van Buren. And the answer is William Henry Harrison. Interestingly, while this was a slogan during his run for the presidency in 1840, it refers to the Battle of Tippecanoe, which occurred in 1811 in Indiana, in which Harrison was a general in the army at the time, and his forces defeated Shawnee Indians trying to resist westward expansion. Unsuccessfully, obviously. 26. Who had been a CIA director? Hoover, George H.W. Bush, Nixon, or Ford?
Bush.
And whoever whispered the answer, it was correct. Bush served very briefly, 1976 to 77 under Ford. The CIA was organized in 1947 and actually went through an iteration of names. So at the time, Bush wasn't technically director of the CIA, but that's relatively unimportant. He did have that background. 27. Whose last words were falsely reported, or maybe not, to be Thomas Jefferson survives? Washington, John Adams, Madison, and Monroe. And the answer is John Adams. As you may know, they both died on the same day and on July 4th. This is subject to dispute, so we'll leave it at that. But what isn't subject to dispute is that Adams was a Federalist. Jefferson was the Democrat Republican. They had very different theories of how strong the national government should be. They were enemies at a time, and then in around 1812, for reasons that I don't know, they were able to resume a friendship and engaged in a fairly extensive letter writing campaign that lasted until their respective deaths.
Guy, which one actually died first?
I think Jefferson died first, which would make Adams's comment ironic. But again, the question is whether Adams really said that, or that just became an apocryphal story that sounded good because of the unusual nature of when they died and on what day they died. All right, let's go to 28.
Just to tell you, Jefferson died 5 hours before Adams.
Okay, and that was what I said, that he died first.
Yeah.
Okay, who is known for his efforts to slow down Reconstruction? Lincoln, Andrew Johnson, Grant, Hayes. This will tie in with the next question that you won't see yet. But the answer, as you probably got, is Andrew Johnson. He had a much different view of how Reconstruction should go, and as a result had all kinds of difficulties, including the first impeachment with the Congress. He felt that the South should have a wider degree of latitude to regulate the transition from slavery after the Civil War. Obviously a huge topic, so I'll leave it at that, but let's go to 29, which ties in with this one, and that is who took an action that effectively ended Reconstruction, or is generally viewed as having ended it by historians. Hayes, Garfield, Lincoln, or Cleveland. And the answer here is Hayes. This resulted as part of the process, a very difficult process, by which the contested 1876 election was resolved. And after the commission that we talked about in question 1, what happened is that it was still subject to appeals and challenges right up through what was then the inauguration date of March 4th. And in order to resolve that and have an actual president who could take over, the powers to be for Hayes made a deal with which he agreed that he would withdraw federal troops that were still in the South, that were there to maintain order following the end of the Civil War. And as a result of that withdrawal, as well as some related economic deals, the group that supported Tilden, who had actually won the popular vote in that election, withdrew their threat of an appeal or further challenges. And Hayes went on, of course, to be declared president. And also as a result, the Democrats took over the South, and Reconstruction was replaced by a more anti-Black series of separate state actions that wreaked havoc for decades to come. All right, where are we? Number 30. Who said, "I felt like the moon, the stars, and the planets had fallen on me"? Andrew Johnson, Lyndon Johnson, Truman, or Ford? And here the answer is Truman, who said this to the Washington press corps after learning of FDR's death in 1945. Okay, 31. Something that will bring to mind more recent events. Which president attended his successor's inauguration? Washington, John Adams, Andrew Johnson, Franklin Roosevelt, Richard Nixon. And the answer is only George Washington. So obviously Trump was far from the first. All right, 32. Which president won a Pulitzer Prize? Clinton, Eisenhower, Kennedy, Obama. And it's Kennedy in 1957 for Profiles in Courage.
Are you saying you think he wrote it, Guy?
I knew someone would make that comment, and I have heard many say he didn't. But that's not the same as saying he didn't win it.
Right.
All right, I think because of time, I'm going to skip 33. Just because I have a lot and I have more favorites. 34, which president's wife is most associated with ice cream as a dessert? We are all old enough that this question is a legitimate one. And I won't read for time. I won't, since you're looking at the screen, I won't read the choices. The answer is Madison. And the reason is that Dolly Madison was his wife. She was a well-known hostess. And apparently in 1919, her name was used by a company that started an ice cream retail and wholesale business. For some reason, oddly spelling her first name differently. And so I don't know about you, but where I grew up, Dolly Madison ice cream was sold in all of these supermarkets. And I believe, from what I tried to find out yesterday, it's still around, but I have not seen it marketed in New England anywhere. Who was the first president to be born in a hospital?
Carter.
This one's a little surprising until you think about how things worked for many years. And of course, when the presidents were born, the answer is Jimmy Carter. Born in 1924 in Plains, Georgia. His mother was a nurse, and the hospital, it's kind of like a woman's hospital in which he was born, is now named the Lillian G. Carter Nursing Center. Okay, 36. Other than John Adams, what other vice president is buried in Massachusetts? John Quincy Adams, Calvin Coolidge, Henry Wilson, John Nance Garner, Elbridge Gerry.
Thanks.
And the answer here, which I think few know, or without the benefit of a limited number of answers, is Henry Wilson. Henry Wilson is buried in Natick. He was a vice president under Grant, and he died in office. Gary was vice president under Madison, and Coolidge was vice president under Harding, but they were not buried in Massachusetts. I'm going to skip 37. I will skip 38. 39. Which president did Alexander Graham Bell try to save with a metal detecting device machine that he invented? Lincoln, McKinley, Garfield, or Wilson? And the answer is Garfield. This was the subject of a wonderful, relatively recent book by Candace Millard called Destiny of the Republic. And Garfield was shot in the back. The bullet was lodged in his body, causing infection, and the doctors that were available did a poor job. And Bell tried to come up with some device that would locate the bullet and make it easier to remove it. Okay. 40. Which president officially named the executive mansion the White House? Or put differently, how did it get its name? Lincoln, Coolidge, John Adams, Teddy Roosevelt. And the answer is Theodore Roosevelt. This was done in 1901 by an executive order. And before that, the building was called the President's House, or the executive mansion? Which president granted the most pardons? Number 41. Now, the answer is Franklin D. Roosevelt, and you might be tempted to think, well, of course, because he was in office for a longer period of time. But that's not really the reason. He granted 2,819 pardons, and most arose in 1933 in connection with the, we'll just say, with the realization that a lot of people who were imprisoned for sedition charges during the 1918 to early 20s period, when there was the rise of communism, great fear of aliens and terrorists, had been imprisoned unfairly. So he had a very special reason. It wasn't just longevity. 42, which president was a good painter or artist at any point in his life, not limited to the presidency or after it? And the answer is all of the above. I actually looked at U.S. Grant's paintings yesterday. They were fairly good. He started painting and drawing at a very, very early age in his teens. And as you know, George W. Bush has done a very good job of developing this hobby after the presidency and publishing his collections. 43, which president's wife was a bigamist? It's important to introduce some salacious questions here, so this is my first. And the answer is Andrew Jackson, whose great love over many, many years was Rachel. They were married in 1790, and at the time, she was being divorced, and she did not realize, and Jackson didn't know at all, that the divorce under the appropriate state procedures had not become final. So technically, she was still married when they married, and then they remarried in 1794. And not surprisingly, because any ammunition to bring down someone is so delightfully acquired by enemies, this was used against Jackson throughout his political career, and needless to say, got him very, very upset. 44, which president received the Purple Heart, the military decoration? And the answer is John Kennedy, who suffered wounds, certainly in the back, which plagued him all his life. In 1943, in the Pacific, when his patrol boat, the famous PT-109, was rammed and sunk by a Japanese ship. Okay, 45. Which individual was the youngest nominee for president by a major political party? John Kennedy, William Jennings Bryan, Daniel Webster, Adlai Stevenson. So this is nominee. Doesn't have to be the winner. And the answer is Bryan. He was first nominated in the 1896 election at the age of 36. And then he ran again in 1900 and 1908. What president purchased, I'm sorry, 46. What president purchased Alaska from the Russian Empire? And let's combine it with 47, which is, what was the price? For those who thought that they could have made a bid if they had been around at the time. This was 1867. So the answer was Andrew Johnson. And the price was 7.2 million. Some of you may recall that this acquisition was given the name Seward's Folly or Seward's Icebox at the time by critics who thought that it was a very poor investment. And Seward was the Secretary of State under Lincoln and then under Andrew Johnson. Okay, 48. Which president benefited from the slogan 54-40 or fight? And we'll combine this with 49, which asks, to what does that slogan refer? So this is the follow-up two questions to my comments on Polk and Westwood expansion and the annexation of Texas. It refers to the successful effort by the United States to get the Northwest territories from Great Britain, or probably I should say to resolve the controversy that existed between Britain and the US over who had the right to control those territories, which at the time were technically, I think, called the Oregon Territory. And it was done by Polk, who was our most, well, along with Jefferson and the Louisiana Purchase, were the two presidents that most presided over the expansion of the country. And it refers to longitude and latitude. 54-40 was the latitude that the US claimed it had a right to, and it was the bottommost portion of the Russian control of Alaska. Eventually, this was settled by a treaty at the 49th parallel, which is where it is today, the top of Washington State, even with Montana and the other states. It was the Treaty of Oregon in 1846. Okay. 50. Which president was most fluent? Was fluent in the most languages? John Quincy Adams, Jefferson, Franklin Roosevelt, Teddy Roosevelt. And the answer is John Quincy Adams. He spoke 8 languages, including English. We will come to a similar question later relating to the intelligence of US presidents. So I won't further comment on John Quincy Adams right now. Okay, here's a fun one. 51, and I'm going to combine it with 52. How many state capitals are named after a president, and what are they? So obviously both go together. If you know the number, well, try to write down obviously the name of the capital, which will be the name of a president, and the state. And then, of course, if you get them all, you'll get the number. And no throwing things out there. I suspect you're going to want more time for this one, but I'll give the answer now. The answer is 4. It's Lincoln, Nebraska, Jackson, Mississippi, Madison, Wisconsin, and Jefferson City, Missouri. Now, here's a fun one. The next, 53. Identify the one foreign country whose capital is named after a US president. And my comment after you think about this will be why.
Okay. I know that one.
And the answer is
Liberia.
that whoever said that got it right. All right, so you're on a roll. What's the capital?
Monrovia. All
right. Well, just for that, you get a free year's membership in the Newton Men's Club. That is precisely correct. Monrovia, Liberia. I'm doing a good job. Liberia. Liberia was, we'll say, originated in the late 18 teens and early 1820s when the American Colonization Society, which had a lot of prestigious people in it, and it was all formed by whites, wanted to come up with a country to which freed blacks could be resettled. And they came up with what is now Liberia. They had to get it, and that was a process, of course, in and of itself, on the west coast of Africa. And the process required money. In 1824, there was a fort built on the territory that they had gotten up to that point. And that was really the start of what became I think it was the second Black republic in the world after Haiti. And because of funding to support this from the US government during Monroe's term, which was from, we said it before, 1817 to 1825, in his honor, they named the capital city Monrovia. Okay, 54. What city with a population over 1 million is named after a vice president? Our first vice president question. Dallas, Louisville, Houston, Portland. And the answer, again, bringing to mind the expansionism of President Polk is George Dallas, because Dallas was Polk's vice president at the time, and Texas was admitted to the Union finally under Polk, as we discussed earlier. Number 55. Which of the following presidents appear on US currency in circulation? And one might debate the in circulation, but technically it's everyone, it's all the presidents, so it's everyone but Franklin. Jefferson's on the $2 bill, Grant's on the 50, Jackson is on the 20. 56, how many times have there been 3 straight 2-term presidents? Once, twice, 3 times, never. And well, I think I heard that. The answer is twice. You had most recently Clinton, Bush, and Obama. And then in the beginning, you had Jefferson, Madison, and Monroe. I'm going to skip 57 and 58. 59, how many presidents never issued a veto? Choice of 4 answers. This is 59, and the answer is 7. I think I'm going to skip 60. 61, who was the last Supreme Court nominee to be rejected by vote of the Senate? Kind of a tie-in with the presidency. Harriet Miers, Harold Carswell, Merrick Garland, Robert Bork. And the answer is Bork. He was a nominee of Ronald Reagan, and he was rejected in 1987 by a vote of 58 to 42. You know, for those for whom Garland's name rang a bell, of course, he wasn't rejected by a vote. It never came to a vote. Who appointed 62? Who appointed the most federal judges during his time in office? Reagan, Franklin Roosevelt, Trump, Clinton. And the answer is Reagan, 402. And remember, we're dealing with federal judges, so it's not limited to justices of the Supreme Court, which is the subject of the next question. So 63, who appointed the most Supreme Court justices during his time in office? Jackson, FDR, Nixon, Washington. And so for those of you thinking most logically about this, the answer is Washington, because naturally there were none before he became president. So he ended up appointing 11 Supreme Court justices, not because there were 11, but some, of course, died during his 8 years in office, and he had replacement appointments. Okay, 64. Who first had a poet recite a poem at his inauguration? Kennedy, Hoover, Lyndon Johnson, George H.W. Bush. Listen, this is serious. The woman who just did it for Biden, I think, just came out with a book about the creation of her poem.
Amanda Gorman.
Yeah, or else it had her poem with commentary. And if I recall, she made it to the cover of Time magazine.
Amanda Gorman.
So correct. But she is not the answer to this question. The answer to this question is Kennedy in 1961. And that takes us to question 65, which is, who was the poet? Angelou, Untermeyer, Frost, or Brooks? And the answer is Robert Frost, who amazingly was 86 years old at the time. Okay, 66. If Congress is in session, how many days does a president have to sign or veto a bill before it automatically becomes law? Which it does. 7, 10, 14, or 21. Ilana, when are we shut off?
There's another meeting on the Zoom at 11 a.m. So that's in 12 minutes, yeah.
Oh, okay, we have a few more minutes. Well, the answer is 10 days, but what's interesting to know about this, if you're familiar with the term pocket veto, is that if Congress adjourns at any point during those 10 days, then the president can do nothing. That's called a pocket veto. And the bill will not become a law under those circumstances because Congress would not have had the opportunity to override a veto had the president issued one. But absent a veto, if Congress is in session, if he does nothing, then after 10 days, it becomes law. Okay, here's a fun one, 67. In a 2006 study, forget whether you think this is ridiculous or not, but done at a university, the top 20 smartest presidents were identified through an algorithm that had been developed. Now, this is 2006, so bear that in mind. Focusing on the top 10, who of the following were not on the list of the top 10, including the choice that, the last choice, if you think all were? And the answer is that all were. All these 5 were all in the top 10. Don't ask me to do from memory the 5 that I didn't put on the list. The ranking one, which ties back to the question on foreign language fluency, was determined to be John Quincy Adams, and they felt he had an IQ in the range of 165 to 175. Again, this is prior to IQ tests. But I've seen that frequently in a number of comments. Now, that doesn't make him the best president any more than Carter, who I'm pretty sure was also in the top 10, was viewed as a great president, but they were in the list of the brightest. Okay, 68. Which of these presidents had a child who served in a significant public office after the child grew up? Van Buren, Lincoln, Taft, Kennedy, all of the above. And the answer is all of the above. John Van Buren was Attorney General of New York. Robert Todd Lincoln was a Secretary of War and also a minister. We would now use the phrase ambassador to the United Kingdom. Robert Taft was a US Senator, and Caroline Kennedy was ambassador to Japan. Okay, 69. Which president lost only one electoral vote in an election? And why?
Madison.
Lost, who
Madison.
said? I'm sorry, who said what?
Madison.
It's not on the list?
I mean Monroe. Monroe.
Oh, well, you're a believer in second chances?
Yes.
Well, it is Monroe. This was the second election, 1820, and you may recall the comment on the era of good feeling. So in that year, Monroe ran basically unopposed. And the reason, which is disputed by historians, from what I read, is that there was one elector, a fellow named William Plumer from New Hampshire, and he actually had a good background. He was a former US Senator and a governor of New Hampshire. He voted for John Quincy Adams, and the reason one can read is that he felt that George Washington deserved to be the only president to be elected by unanimous vote. Some believe, from what he said, that he simply felt that Monroe was a lousy president and didn't agree that he deserved to get his vote. All right, let's see if we could squeeze in a few more. I like this one, 70. Which future president and or vice president signed both the Declaration of Independence and the US Constitution? So we've got 1776 and 1787. Jefferson, Madison, Gary, John Adams, Washington, none of the above. And the answer is none of the above, which is probably not what you were expecting. The Declaration of Independence was signed by Jefferson, John Adams, and Elbridge Gerry, who was a later vice president. And the Constitution was signed by Washington, Madison, and Gerry was there throughout the Constitutional Convention. He was a representative from Massachusetts, but he didn't sign it because he felt that it ought to have had a Bill of Rights as part, as part of the Constitution. And as you know, the Bill of Rights was not, although it became part through an amendment process in 1791. Let's see, we have very little time. Let's go to 73. Who was the first president to appear on a circulating coin? And the answer is Lincoln, the penny in 1909, which is interesting because coins were used right from Washington's time on, even before there was any federal paper currency. 77. Who was the first president to live in the White House? And I'll do these last few quickly. The answer is John Adams. The government, as you know, went from New York City to Philadelphia and then to Washington. The move occurred to Washington in June of 1800. Adams was president at the time, but the building wasn't ready. So he lived in a hotel until November 1st of 1800. By then he had been, well, maybe not by then, but shortly thereafter he had been defeated and moved out by the following March. And okay, let's go to 81 as our last question. You will love this one. Who had 5 brothers-in-law who served in the Confederate Army? Grant, Buchanan, Lincoln, Andrew Johnson. And with only minutes remaining, the answer is Abraham Lincoln. You never really see this. Mary Todd Lincoln was brought up in Lexington, Kentucky, even though Lincoln met her, if I recall, and it would have met her in Illinois. One of those brothers, the entire family sided with the South, Mary Todd's family, and one of the brothers-in-law who had married into the family, his wife was a sister or stepsister of Mary Todd's, was Benjamin Harlan Helm, who was a West Point graduate, and he was a brigadier general, sorry, who died in 1863 in the Battle of, where was it, Chattanooga. So that, I guess we've got virtually no time left. So I thank you all. If you want to pursue anything with questions, I'm happy to take them, answer them if I can. There were about 10 questions we never got to, but so be it. And I hope you all had fun.
Super job, Guy. Just super job.
Thanks, Guy.
Very good.
Thank you. Everyone have a great day. And
Terrific.
thanks
Thank
a
you,
lot.
guys.
Thanks, Gary, again.
Thank you.
I lost the Zoom.
Thank you.
Obviously, I could hear it.